Welcome to Blueprints for Liberty, Designing the Freedom Cities of Tomorrow. This is a podcast that explores the visionary concept of freedom cities and how we can create living environments that prioritize individual liberty, social harmony, and equal opportunities for all. We look back through history to see how the past informs the future and how people can self-organize in their communities to support self-sufficiency. We also look to develop leaders that are moral and ethical in a world that is spinning out of control. Tune in to be part of the conversation shaping the future of our communities.
Welcome. We're glad you chose to take some of the time out of your day to join us today. Today we have David Jones. He and I both share a passion for history, and he has written a book that I don't know, is it a book or a movie? Both.
Well, it's a book that, in hopes of being a movie. In fact, when I wrote it, as a screenwriter, I've written 12 movies. I wrote it to be like a mini series,
Ah,
six to 10 episode mini series. So, for a historical novel, it keeps chugging along. There's a pace to it. So it will hopefully be a movie. I'm in talk with somebody who's made some films, and they're interested in possibly taking it to like Netflix or something. So,
oh, nice. Okay.
uh,
Yeah, I got the book, so I knew there was a book. I was just like, but I haven't seen a
it
movie.
exists.
Yeah, it's there. Well, definitely keep me posted on that one because I love
Sure.
historical fiction. I've been watching Outlander. Um
Hmm.
and it's one of those that just keeps like it's supposed to end and it just keeps going and going and going
Right.
and
Right. Right.
like, so it's fun. I love historical fiction. I love history. So tell me a little bit about yourself in general and a little bit about your book and then we'll just jump in.
I love history. My degree from Indiana University proves that. Out of state student, paid a lot of money for it, and I finally later on in life had time to reason to use it. But I love telling stories, and I wanted to combine both of them for a novel um, that would be for all ages, really 12 and up. So it's written simply enough for kids, young people to get the gist of it, and then smartly enough for the older, wiser people to us adults, maybe, to really get a lot out of it. It's rich in a whole lot of stuff. So that's part of me as well. I've written 12 movies. Had a career in Hollywood for a little while. Did some stand-up comedy and some acting, and found out neither paid really well unless you're like a superstar. And by that time, I kind of lost some passion, so I just continued to write. Um, what else about me? I'm involved in my church. I love people. I can't wait to go to Europe and travel Europe. So anybody that wants to invite me, um, she'll tell you how to get in touch. You
Very
get, that's the deal. You get my company and you pay for
I like that.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a flight attendant in my
Oh,
in my younger days, and it's interesting because my husband and I were just discussing this. Now this is totally off topic, but interestingly enough, we just bought a self-driving car in the last few days.
what?
Yes, I know. A Tesla. It was a
You
self-driving.
must live in California.
No, 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 no. I live in Virginia. Um,
Ah, my
yes.
home state.
Oh, it's kind of struggling right now. But
I'm from Northern Virginia,
oh,
and it's been struggling for a long time.
yeah, what part?
Alexandria. I grew up right next to George Washington's home,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
the Fort Hunt area.
Yeah. I lived in Herndon for about 12 years. We're
Sure.
we're down by Charlottesville now.
Okay.
The historical part of it. And I do lots of historical and ghost tours, and they're super fun. But my husband and I were commenting, I've traveled a lot for business. I traveled a lot as a flight attendant. And it's like, I just don't want to fly anymore. It's just not fun like it used to be. And I mean, it hasn't been fun for a long time, but at least it was
Right.
not so bad. And, talking about going to Europe, I would love to go to Europe if I could just teleport myself over there.
Well, it's not a far flight for us. It's just the crazy way of, unless you're able to get a direct and you're able to get there before 5 o'clock or after 5 o'clock in the morning, and you got to figure out what am I going to do in London until then, and you got to be careful where to go these days in London. But now Europe is my big traveling passion. I've never been, and I can't tell you how many episodes of Travels in Europe with Steve, what's his name, that I've watched, and all the reading and history and stuff. So it's one of those fantasies that I have to fulfill at some point. Don't ask me why it hasn't been done. But as somebody who basically spent the last 6 years on the road from Fairbanks, Alaska to being in California constantly and all over this country for business, the business travel stinks. It's a necessary thing that has to be done. But you know what? I get such a kick out of people. So I try to turn it into something that's kind of drudgery to some kind of a pleasure thing, because I always try to make sure I give myself enough time to do something interesting wherever I am. And but the part that I don't like is actually boarding the plane and then being on the plane and waiting to get off the plane. That part stinks, but every other part, it's just part of the deal. So, but it loses its sexiness and appeal pretty quickly. When I first started doing business travel, it was like, what? This is awesome. And then after a while, it's like, I just want to get there and get home.
Yeah. I spent 5 years of my growing up years in Kenai, Alaska. So,
Okay. How
yeah,
about that? Beautiful.
yeah. So, all travel aside, that's the self-driving car. Back to that is like
Right.
I've been, to Europe several times. Haven't been worldwide. I've never had that pleasure, but we've decided we like the United States. We like driving around the country.
Yes.
So our self-driving car is beneficial that way, but the downside is trying to find charging stations and
Yes.
can be challenging.
That's a reason why one of my best friends has a couple of Teslas. One
Mhm.
of the reasons why I haven't done it is because I do region, instead of flying regionally, like to Atlanta or something, it's a 6 hour drive. Why go through all that mess when you just drive there?
Mhm.
But the constant having to wait and stop for 3 hours to charge that thing back up, it just takes
Mhm.
so much of the coolness of a Tesla out. So my SUV gets 40 miles to the gallon, so I'm pretty happy.
Yeah. My major motivation was as I've gotten older, my eyes don't work so well at night. And
Mm.
when you do ghost tours at night, and I have to drive quite a distance to get to and from, but all that aside, tell me a little bit about your book.
Oh gosh! So in 2024, recognizing that America was on the verge of celebrating its 250th anniversary,
Fighting.
uh, and I grew up reading on my parents' their library, all their history books and stuff, and I've known for years that my family history goes back to the Mayflower. One of my direct descendants, Charles Carroll, was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. The name Carroll's been in my family before then and since. My mother was named after him. So I've got a lot of who's who in my family of history. And my dad has a history degree. I have a history degree. So I thought to myself, well, what would be more American than monetizing America 250? So I came up with a couple of ideas, and I wasn't passionate about any of them. So I came up with one idea: tell the Revolutionary War and our founding through the eyes of a young child, an adolescent, and to really raise something for young people to get super excited about and kind of reintroduce them in a very just holistic, nonpartisan kind of way in approaching how our nation came to be, what kind of people were behind it, both the well-known marble statues as well as everybody else. And so I started off with this idea about a boy in Boston. And I figured, well, might as well start off with the Boston Tea Party. But I thought, what is his backstory? Because as an actor and as a storyteller and a screenwriter, you want to think through those kinds of things. So I made him come from Derby, England, right in the middle of England. His lost his father. The original draft opened up at his mother's funeral, and he was adopted sort of by his aunt and uncle who treated him like a slave. And then because of their debt, they sold him off to a baron as an indentured servant. So now he was an indentured orphan, but there was so much more to him. So he ends up having a run-in with Ben Franklin at the estate, who says, America will understand you. And he ends up running away and getting on a ship called the Beaver, which is one of the three ships that would ransack in the Boston Tea Party. So he's on that ship as a stowaway, gets found out, put in the brig, and then the night of the Boston Tea Party, Paul Revere stumbles on him and liberates him, adopts him, and he gets immersed into the Sons of Liberty and Revolutionary War culture. And so we see the founding of the nation through his eyes. And I created a timeline, a historically accurate timeline. All the real history is meticulously developed, and I wanted to make sure it was, again, understandable by young people, and entertaining and rich and smart enough for everybody else. And so I said, okay, let's go on a journey. So my character's name is Oliver Atkinson. And so we go on this little journey with Oliver, and we watch his formation, his arc, and we watch him wrestling with the things about liberty, slavery, even Abigail Adams when she was yelling out to her husband, "Don't forget the ladies," as he's going to the Continental Congress. And so I talk about a lot of different things that were going on in the country at the time. But that was the inspiration. I wanted to kind of tell a holistic story that would show just the greatness of these people. Jefferson wrote his documents about a more perfect union, not a perfect union, but a more perfect union. And I think that's important for us to understand today. There is no perfect union other than the kingdom of God. And so our ambition in this nation, and their writing of a document that was living and breathing, fixed but living and breathing, that allowed for our continual growth. And I think in many ways we've gotten so far away from that in our country that I wanted, again, to write this book to educate, to entertain, to be able to express my creativity and my love of history. And I think I've accomplished it all. And I'm having a lot of people get back to me and say, you know what? I didn't know these things, or I didn't understand, or now that makes sense to me, or what have you. And while at the same time, them going, that was fun. That was a fun adventure.
Yeah, that sounds, oh, I love that. And I love the fact that it's written for an audience of young people, because I think young people, I mean, let's state the obvious here. Young people are our future. And if we don't teach them the real story, and I'm not a historian by trade. I'm a
Mhm.
storyteller, and I love history, and I
Sure.
love telling stories about history, but I wouldn't ever claim to be a quote historian.
Right.
But I love when I tell, when I do my historical tours, I want to tell both sides of the story. I remember reading a book years and years and years ago about the Revolutionary War through the eyes of the British, the British.
Hmm.
I mean, growing up, I'm old enough that we actually got to hear about all of the American side of the story in
Right.
school. And I was like, oh, that'd be interesting to see that, just through the eyes of the British. And it was a really good book, and it really enriched my understanding of the whole story. I- You know, I Okay, I'm young. When I was young and naive, I was like, "Oh, everybody wanted liberty. Everybody wanted freedom. This was the greatest thing there ever was, right?"
Right.
And then come to find out, no, everybody didn't really want that. But it's understandable. They felt loyal to the crown, and
Hmm.
they knew on some level it was going to take an immense amount of sacrifice. And some people were just like, hey, it's not so bad, just pay some more taxes and whatever. And
Well,
taxes.
there were a lot of loyalists. In fact, the founding fathers considered themselves British.
Yes. Yeah.
So when Revere made his famous Midnight Ride, he didn't say the British are coming. They considered themselves British. He
Yeah.
said the redcoats are coming. You know, so that's it. The regulars are coming. Rather, the regulars are coming, meaning the regular infantry, who we know as also the redcoats.
Mm-hmm.
So their first ambition was not to separate from
Mm-hmm.
England. It was to have a voice. You're gonna charge us taxes, and then you're gonna control everything we do. We just want a voice. The Enlightenment had begun by that time, and a lot of our founders were influenced by John Locke, Rousseau, Hobbes, and a few others that talked about liberty not being bestowed upon humanity by the king or by whoever's in power. They're not the ones that grant our rights. Our rights are God given. And you combine those philosophies of individualism and our own unique set of human rights, because everybody was grouped socially and economically back then. You either the few elites and everybody else who served everybody, or you were recognizing human rights on a one-to-one basis. And that's why groups like the Sons of Liberty, where you had John Hancock, who was filthy rich, palling around with dirt farmers, and printers like Paul Revere, and lawyers like John Adams, and brewers like Sam Adams, and everybody in between. There was no discrimination. And there was no, while there were still social structures in colonial America at the time, for the most part, what independence did is it removed more and more and more of those things. And our founders recognized again that our rights are given to us by God and not by the king or not by a government, whether it sits in Washington, D.C., or it sits in London, England. Our rights are more unique to that. They transcend human institutions.
See, and I think you're on to something there that I think really is missing in our, not just our youth, but our now 20, 30-ish, 40-ish, I hate to say it sometimes, is that
I don't remember the 40s.
I know, but when we say our rights are given by God, they automatically take that as a theocratic statement, which on some
Mm-hmm.
level it is. But what in essence it's saying is because they were bestowed upon us by God, no one can take them away from us.
That's right.
If a right is bestowed upon you by a government, then a government can take it away
Can
from you.
take it away. Exactly.
And the
Exactly.
state
That's such a
is
good
not.
point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's such a good point, and I think you're right. The founders were all Christians,
Mhm.
and they recognized that self rule could not occur apart from a religious people. And so when you see the word religion in those documents, then we're talking about Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and Shintoists and Wiccans, et cetera, et cetera. They were talking about Christians. They were talking about Congregationalists, Anabaptists, Anglicans, and even Catholics. Maryland was really a Catholic state, and my direct descendant Charles Carroll of Carrollton was a Catholic. He was the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence. But so when they meant religion, they meant under the broader umbrella of Christianity. And the Great Awakening. There's a movie that just came out called The Great Awakening. It's got
Yeah.
it's about one of my favorite people, George Whitefield,
George.
an Englishman who came to Americas they started orphanages in Georgia and did other things, and was close friends with Ben Franklin, who was an atheist.
Mhm.
And the Great Awakening occurred and brought the nation, the colonial America, from a place of moral and religious indifference to a place of being on fire for the things of God and for the scriptures, and the reintroduction of the Bible into common society, to everyday life. And I think without that occurrence, our nation may have never been formed. We may have not had the moral backbone, because for the first time in history, freedom and liberty for government was based upon a moral right found from God, as opposed to, like we just talked about, a right given to us by a government. And so Washington himself and many others have said, look, and this is only going to last as long as the people are upright and moral. And there's a lot of talk about, excuse me, a lot of talk about the Bible and the scriptures and the Christian life, etc., being the foundation for our nation. Secularists don't have to like it, but it's true. So when I wrote this book, I wanted to make sure that element, that my writing was true to the period. So when they talk about providence and they talk about these things, it was a natural part of their conversation. I didn't think it would be fair to them and to us to remove those elements, those religious elements, just to make the book more broadly appealing. I think it's important that we engage and understand these things to understand the birth of our country, what it was set up for and established, and then how it's to be maintained. And I think we're better off for it. You mentioned theocracy. It's a nation under God. And again, it gets back to God recognizing him as the one who's the grantor of rights. He's the one that raises up nations. He's the one that sets boundaries. He's the one that's our images, we're made in his image. That's reasoning and morality, relationship, love, and a few other things that are his communicable traits. And so without that recognition, our nation starts to fall apart. And I think we've seen that. The other side is that there can be tyranny on the religious side, where there's a lack of tolerance for people of other faiths, and making them second class. And I don't think that was the intention of the scriptures either. Conversion is never forced. Conversion is a sovereign act of God. And while there are moral do's and don'ts and rights and wrongs that make for a healthy nation, certain things can't necessarily be forced. But the reality is unless we honor God, Scripture says, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. And I love my friends who may not know Christ or may not believe the same thing I do, but I also believe that there's a better way of doing life, and there's a better way of therefore doing government, for all kinds of reasons. But the book isn't so much a moral or a spiritual treatise. It just has that woven through because it was true to the time.
It is, and several things come to mind as you were talking. In some of my research on Ben Franklin, and I use this term loosely, he kind of stumbled across a Quaker meeting one day and decided to go in. And he found that, and he did make a comment. I don't know how true to it. He certainly didn't become a Quaker, but he said if I were ever to join a religious movement, it would be the Quakers. They aligned more with his way of belief and thinking. And I found that rather interesting because they're not your classic Protestant Catholic, kind of group. And I personally wouldn't become a Quaker, but I have a lot of respect for them and for their belief systems. And
Well,
another,
the Quakers are an interesting people. They were kind of precursors to what we know as the Pentecostals today.
Mhm.
And so Ben, somebody asked me on a recent podcast, out of all the people in your book, who's the one person you would recommend that I have on a podcast? And I said, Ben Franklin. A lot of people might say Thomas Jefferson, but he was so quiet and reserved. He might not be super interesting. Either that, or he talks so high over your head that you wouldn't catch it. George would be fantastic, of course. He was just a character. He was an amazing man. But Ben, I think, would have been the most entertaining and interesting. And he was best friends with George Whitefield. George was a revivalist. He's the one that really got the Great Awakening going. And he had a theater background. He was able to project to 20,000 people at a time. And we saw mass conversions and people weeping in repentance because he was unashamed of the gospel. He would preach the whole, it wasn't Joel Osteen. He wasn't making everything Jesus light and God's going to give you a new Rolls Royce if you just come to him.
Yeah.
He was everything but that. He's just, Bible tells me what to preach and then I do it. And Franklin found it fascinating. He would travel with him just to hear him preach. And they were close friends and exchanged letters for years. But Ben never made peace with God. And there came a point in his life where he recognized that it's just not going to happen. And so he was going to spend his years trying to make sure that the kingdom of, the United States of America had a republic that had some lasting power. And he's famously known for telling a woman who asked him, do we have a constitution now? He goes, you have a republic if you can keep it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So our American experiment had never, ever been tried in all of history. It was the most unique thing and still is. Mm-hmm. And so when you get a guy like Ben Franklin saying something like that, you need to listen, because what did he mean by that? Here he comes out of the Great Awakening. He's an inventor. He's a genius. He's a diplomat. He's a statesman. And he's saying, if you can keep it. And he very well knew, in spite of his own religious reluctance, that that's exactly what it would take to keep it.
Yeah. It's interesting too, as you mentioned Thomas Jefferson. On one of my tours, I tell this, I won't go into great detail, but there was, when Thomas Jefferson passed away and his estate was in, turmoil, chaos, because he was deeply in debt, and a banker named Barclay purchased it because he wanted to make a silkworm farm and tear it all down. Thank goodness he wasn't successful, because Uriah Levy was a Jewish naval officer who loved Thomas Franklin, because, not Thomas Franklin, Thomas Jefferson. I'm getting them mixed up, putting them together here.
Sure.
But anyway, he wanted to honor Thomas Jefferson, so he purchased his mansion, and did, a lot of rehab on it. Eventually it kind of fell into disrepair again, but his nephew was able to, pick up where he left off and do a little bit more with it. But he was just in love with Thomas Jefferson because of his belief in religious freedom. And so many people say, well, Thomas Jefferson was a deist. Well, yes, he was. And if you go back to the original language of the First Amendment, it was freedom of conscience and not necessarily freedom of religion. That evolved over time and became freedom of religion. But really, the basic premise of that is really freedom of conscience. It's not to say we should be Jewish or we should be Protestant or we should be Catholic or Quakers or whatever. That wasn't the point of it. The point was, you're even, if you're Franklin and you're an atheist, you're entitled to that freedom of consciousness,
Right.
and we are going to respect that. Whereas as the government, we are not going to try to impose, and people, and that's the other part that people don't recognize, is that they say separation of church and state. There's nothing in the
Doesn't
Constitution.
exist.
It does.
Doesn't exist.
Yeah. And so we all know where it came from, but people think that you need to keep religion totally out of government, and that isn't true.
It can't be true just based upon the writings of the founders.
Yes.
And God is named 4 times in the Declaration of Independence alone. So it doesn't mean that. You can't contextually, hermeneutically divine that that's what was meant. And for those who don't know, a group of Baptists in Pennsylvania wrote Thomas Jefferson for one of their conventions. Is the government going to, put an end to us? Are they going to step in and interfere? And he said, no. Basically, there's a separation of church and state. And basically what it means is the government's not going to impose its will and say, the Anglicans. From England, you've got your Anglican Church, and we know that a lot of people were scared out of England, and many of them ended up over here, like on the Mayflower, the Pilgrims, etc., seeking religious expression that was not specifically Anglican. So what he's basically saying is, no, we're not going to tell you how to do your religion. Basically, we're not going to stop that. So it was never about there being no religion in government, any religious expression in government. It's just that we weren't going to formalize and approve one over another, nor were we going to interfere in religious expression, unless, of course, it was dangerous. There are certain elements where government has perhaps a moral right to speak into something. You can't do child sacrifices and a bunch of other things. So it's not, there's not an absolute clear demarcation, but in general practice, government has no business. For me and my church, tell us how to, like the Chinese, they tell you what you can preach and what you can't preach in their little Christian churches. And so that's exactly what Jefferson was trying to avoid. And it was so brilliant that his language and the intent of the document was understood by pretty much everybody back in that day. But this is one of the reasons for the book. I want to reintroduce people to these thoughts, why he as a deist would approach his documents the way he did, what he meant by religion, what he meant by the separation of, should not prohibit and should not establish a Anglican church or Anabaptist church or a Quaker church as the official church of the country. So I want to get people to re-engage these truths and not just try to reinterpret or revise or secularize them from today's cultural point of view, but to go back to what their intention was. I think we'd be richer for it. I think we'd probably get along a little better in some ways for it as well.
I agree. And I wish people realized how intentional they were in their word selection when they put these documents together. They were very intentional, and they chose their words carefully to make sure
Yes.
that it conveyed. And the Supreme Court, we have our originalists, textualists, and then you have this living, it's supposed to be this living document.
Mm-hmm.
Different ideas about how we should how the Supreme Court should interpret the law.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, interesting, huh? But and I love to watch, of course, I love Scalia and Thomas and Alito, because they scrutinize those words.
Yes.
They look at them, and they don't just look at the words, they look at what did it mean during the time. Why did they pick those words? What was their
Yes.
intent? What was their original meaning? And
Mm-hmm.
not that it necessarily in all cases applies today, but that shows me the level of respect they had for our founding fathers.
Sure.
And that makes me feel good to know that they had that level of respect for them, because hopefully we can bring some of those good things forward. Does that make sense?
Well, the reason why certain sex elements of our country don't want to do that is because they know what's there,
Yeah.
and they don't like it. So, if you ever studied Shakespeare in school, you didn't interpret Shakespeare by today's mores and cultural preferences and stuff. Your goal is to go back and understand what exactly Mr. William Shakespeare meant at the time.
Yes.
And that is when you look at ancient texts, when you read Suetonius and his work on the Caesars, you're not reading it through today's lens. You're trying to understand it historically. You want to understand what those ancient documents meant. What did Josephus mean? What did, etc. I mean, it's just, what did Dante mean? You don't read it through today's lens. You try to go back there and read it through that lens. And when I call there's the only parts, I mean, I think that the Constitution is fixed. except for those areas where it either gives power to the states
Mhm.
or on things it didn't address. And then it becomes, I guess, alive at that point where you get to try to fit in, well, what is the best way to take the existing constitution, the laws, and how would this thing that they couldn't have foreseen back then, how does this fit in and maintain harmony and maintain, justifying all of what exists with this new thing for the best expression of what their intent was. So, I'm not a lawyer. I've read enough to know that I never would have made it through law school with my dyslexia and my ADHD. But I've listened to a lot of smart people on this stuff, and again, I think we're better off if we just go back to the original intention of the founders and allow them to tell us what it looked like, and it really worked for a long time. Again, this is a more perfect union, not a perfect union. And we were born in some junk, and we corrected that junk, and we've paid for that junk, and we're still paying for some of that junk. So that's part of the price of humanity in an imperfect union. But there's still no document, and there's still no nation that has ever existed that comes close to the goodness of America, the generosity of America, the freedom of America. People aren't trying to break out of here. They're trying to break in. And that tells you something. Maybe we're not as bad as so many like to think and tell you we're not. And we can get better. That's the good news. We can always get better.
Yeah, I agree. And what's interesting to me is we think about all of the technology that, is my husband and I were talking the other day. It was rather interesting when we first demoed and for a weekend our self-driving car. That was the weekend or the week, I guess you should say, that Artemis went up into space. And it was, I don't know how much you know about AI and Claude and Anthropic and all the,
No, well,
well, my
and I
husband,
have an Artemis T-shirt from NASA when I visited there last year. I'm not wearing it now, but it's a picture of Snoopy with Artemis stuff all around it, NASA and Artemis stuff. So yeah, I think that's cool stuff. But yeah, I know the AI world quite well.
yeah. So you got that week, Anthropic had just come out with a report that was really scary. My husband's way more into it than I am in understanding the details of it, but this AI was basically breaking out of its boundaries. And it was like, whoa, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? Because we need to, harness this and contain it. And so people say, and the other thing that comes to my mind is this is, you know, I don't know, 15, 20 years old at this stage, but cloning and those types of things that are going on in our world today, everybody's like, oh, well, the founders didn't think of things like that. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter because they were so um, the beauty of the document is its simplicity. And
Hmm.
it's, if so, let's say you go to the Fourth or Fifth Amendment, your right to privacy and that type of thing, right? Not to have, people quartered in your house or whatever, and not to have, unreasonable search and seizure.
I'm sorry that ended with the Patriot Act.
I know. See, yeah. And
That
that's
ended with the Patriot Act.
it
We've
did.
been spied on ever since.
Exactly. But if we had really stayed true to those original principles,
Hmm.
we didn't have terrorists back then flying planes into buildings. But even though we had that terrible thing happen to our country, if
Hmm.
we could stay true to these very basic principles, they're just basic.
Right.
And even as you look at all this technology and AI breaking out of its boundaries and going to the moon and self-driving cars and all these kind of things, we still, as we seek to try to manage all of this in the world in which we live today, if we go back to those very basic principles, that's the foundation. And we,
Hmm.
we want to make it too complicated. We want to say, well, we need to have this living, breathing document, which it is meant to be a living, breathing document, but yet still
But
take,
it's not evolving from one genus to another, and
oh,
that's what people are trying to make it these days.
exactly.
Yeah, it is what it is.
And I appreciate because I'm like rambling here trying to explain all this, but just get back to the simplicity and the beauty of the simplicity, the very
Right.
intentional word choices. These men were brilliant. I'm sorry. They just, of all, there's been many brilliant people throughout time. I will never dispute that. But to have that many sitting in one room all at one time, just it's a miracle.
That's a divine thing. I think one of the reasons, well, a couple of reasons why I think God raised up America. I think for one of the major ones, um, but it brought together just a group of the most genius, brilliant people, selfless people. I mentioned my direct descendant, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, richest man in the country, possibly richest man in the world at the time. He had nothing materially to gain by this, but he did so for ideals that were greater than him,
Mhm.
that were beyond him. He knew he was sacrificing everything he owned. He knew he was sacrificing his life. In fact, when he signed of Carrollton. In
Mhm.
other words, yeah, that's me. I'm the Charles Carroll of Carrollton. So, England, if you want to come find me and hang me, you'll know where to find me. And so today, everything is so pragmatic. We're just continually looking for ways of retaining power, turning our positions in government into money making schemes. We're not necessarily about truth all the time. It really is about power and money. And those guys would have rebelled against our current state, our current government. They would take up arms against the way government is run these days because it's so distant from what it was supposed to be. The Patriot Act was. I'm not going to go into conspiracy stuff, but our government knew about the planes that were going to be flown into those buildings.
Mhm.
I mean, we just had so much intel. It was there.
Mhm.
We know a lot of this stuff now. A lot of things that happen in our nation, in some ways, are allowance for consolidation of power. And we were told that, okay, well, we need the Patriot Act. Well, don't worry, we're not going to spy on Americans. It's not
Yeah,
going to happen. We're not
yeah.
going to spy on Americans. It's exactly what happened. And
Mhm.
so they have every text you send, every phone call you make, every show you watch, it's all recorded somewhere, somehow, and can be used against us in a court of law. And even if not, it's still, the government can get into our cars and control our cars now.
Mhm. A
So,
self-driving car.
yeah, and you got a self-driving car. Good luck with that. Don't piss
I know.
off the government.
I know.
So I don't want to go down that path, but it gets so far away from what my book was about. I wanted to say, people, stop,
Yeah.
stop. Look at what we're doing to ourselves. Let's reintroduce ourselves to the founders for the purpose, what they sacrificed, what they went through, the cost of it all, and and maybe find that American spirit once again in our 250th year, so we can get to our 251st year. And at this point, that's kind of a concern.
I know.
It's kind of a
Up in
concern.
the air. We're not
I
sure.
love this place. I love this country. You talk about traveling this country, nothing is. I haven't gone to Europe because I love this country. I love traveling this country. It is the most amazing place. God has given it to us. And the other part I wanted to put in there. The other part where believe why God raised up this nation, it had never been done in all of history. You know, the shackles, rebellions of slaves and serfs may have been successful for a very limited time, and then the powers that be would always come and squash it. We saw the slave rebellions in the Caribbean. We've seen it historically throughout Europe, even in the Far East and in Africa. They don't last. This one lasted because God was behind it, because our intention was to glorify God. And God raised up this nation, I believe, to be a gospel light to the world. And as such, we've built universities, we've built hospitals, we have become the greatest lending country in the world. We've sent out the gospel, we've sent out missionaries, we've been innovative, we have created things that make humanity better, more comfortable, healthier, et cetera, et cetera. And that is one of the reasons why I raised up in America. And it can only happen in a land where there was a recognition of individual rights given to us by God, and that God was the Lord. That's it. When you remove that, he removes his blessing, he removes his favor, and just says, okay, have at it.
Yep.
That's what you want, then
Yep.
have at it. and you'll see the insanity that ensues. I mean, look at Mao's China, look at
Mhm.
Stalin's Russia, look at Hitler's Germany. We can go Pol Pot. You know,
Mhm.
we can just continue to go throughout history. When the true God is removed from something, chaos and death occur, and starvation occurs, and people get jailed, and et cetera, et cetera. This American experiment was to put an end to all that. It's to say we can do this in a different way. We can do this in a way that honors God. We're going to do it by His grace and His power, and His favor will be upon us as long as we maintain that path.
I agree. And I think that was a very, very good summary to end this on. Thank you
Well, I
so
want everybody to make sure they get my book, The Unlikely Life of Oliver Atkinson, and then go to my website at davidjones3.com. That's the number 3. And you can learn more about me. There's a way to contact me there. And if I may just add one other thing, I
much.
have a YouTube channel called Oliver's History Project, where I'm going to release between a few months ago and July 4th, 90 videos, short little 1.5 minute videos on the real history found in the book, and it's cool stuff. I got have everything in there from colonial money to etiquette and courtship stuff to, of course, all your biggies from Washington and Jefferson and Franklin, whom we've talked, to Abigail Adams, slavery. I address it all in true historical fashion in bite-sized forms that you'll love. So you can go there and subscribe and get my stuff. But it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for allowing me to introduce Oliver and his story, this indentured orphan who is a type of America,
Mhm.
vulnerable, young, uncertain, trying to find a voice, trying to find his destiny. And so he's kind of a micro picture of the American colonies, and the message of liberty really resonated with him. And so I hope if you buy it on Amazon that it will resonate with you as well.
Well, thank you so much. I was going to ask you for all that, so you beat me to it. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time
Thank you.
today. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, sure. Thank you. I appreciate you taking time to speak with me.
If you've been enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to leave a 5-star rating to help others discover this valuable content. Your support is greatly appreciated and helps us continue creating engaging episodes for our listeners.